The Economic Community of West African States is ECOWAS, and in the last few days, they are back in the news. It has been fragile for a very long time, and Togo is testing it. Togo is on the brink and pushing ECOWAS to its very limits. Why is this important? We are Togo's neighbors. We are the closest to Togo, culturally, geographically, and so it is very important. Economically, we are very interwoven in what we do. Now, why really is this important as far as we're concerned, and why has Togo been on fire over the last 26 days? Where we've seen political unrest there, it's a long time indeed, almost a month. And this has been going on until we saw these numbers. 7 dead, including 2 minors, 50 arrested, and you must have seen the protests on social media. Togolese are upset. They are angry. Why? Because it's been 58 years since one family dominated and captured the entire country. 58 years. Just pause for a second. And now we've seen an uprising. But the key question is, will this last? The Nyasingbes, they know how to survive. They've been there 38 years. That's the Nyasingbes senior. And for 20 years. They've mastered the art of staying in power, dancing on the heads of snakes. As one very powerful ruler in the Middle East once said, as far as Syria is concerned, they know how to survive. And they have been surviving. They've seen their fair share of protests in the past. Opposition leaders who believe they can take over power through legitimate means. Has never happened. But this is why this is important. And why the ECOWAS project is currently still very challenged. Because already, as we know, 3 West African countries have pulled away from ECOWAS already. And coincidentally, the 3 of them are all French-speaking countries colonized by France. And then we see another one on the brink tonight because of these 2 gentlemen. One who has stayed in power for 38 years, died and handed over to the son who's now there for 20 years. The police say they're tired. Legitimately so. Let's look at what has happened over the last few days, assuming you haven't heard. We know that you can trace this all the way back to Parliament adopting this new, very controversial constitution. And that constitution, by the way, that was amended, gives the foreign Nyasingbes a lifelong presidency. I mean, he is going to be there forever, unless he chooses for some very interesting reason to let go, right? So he edged himself as the president of the Togolese Republic for life. And then the party goes to the parliament. They win majority in parliament, in Togolese elections. Then you have, for them becomes the president of the Council of Ministers. And that is the constitutional change that allows this to happen. And that allows him, guarantees him to stay there forever. And then you have the Sabidi Tobe becoming the presidential ceremonial president, and Togo suspends the French international news outlets because, of course, that tension that we've seen between the French-speaking countries and France also playing out there. And this is what has spilled over into the riots that we are seeing in Togo. But you also see the Togolese government responding to this, and they all do, blaming foreign entities for what is happening locally, not blaming themselves. They actually then said in a statement that dead bodies that were found, including the 7, were as a result of drowning and not murder. But we know that that story isn't exactly the case. But this is the ECOWAS dilemma. They see this unfold. They saw this unfold in Mali. They saw this unfold in Niger and Burkina Faso. And the military stepped in. I mean, and they were very quiet. They found their voice somewhat in this particular scenario, but they're saying very, very little, urging all stakeholders to choose restraint, right? And embrace dialogue, they say, for lasting peace. The people want change. Why is ECOWAS not calling out for Nyasingbes, asking him to step aside? But why did he also look on for him to change the constitution, to give himself a lifetime presidency? And they waited this long for this to erupt before they found their voice. We'll analyze that pretty shortly and give you some interesting perspectives on this from my panelists who are joining me. right? The African Union has been very loudly quiet on the particular subject, but again, it tells its own story. But this is the map I wanted to show you, and the map tells a very important story. This is Mali, this is Burkina Faso, this is Niger. All of them have had their own fair share of unrest, and we know that the military then took advantage of that and took over the reins of power, and they cut ties with ECOWAS, but also cut ties with France. Many say the cutting ties with France bit was very good, but in doing so, they brought in the Russians into play. So again, go there and let's talk to the citizens and let's find out if this really had brought any dividends that the democracy did not deliver. That's a very important point. And now we have Ghana, and now we have Togo straddling us there, and Togo currently is also on fire, right? So that is a very interesting scenario there. And then you look at the factors that have led to the unrest in this particular region here, the three who broke away and formed their own Sahelian union, if you like. The collapse of public trust is a key thing in government. It's a very key thing. And the same story we're seeing in Togo, right? So you don't be surprised if the Togolese defense forces decide, for example, that they will take advantage of this protest and to overthrow the current government. And in many, many people's eyes, the Gnassingbé presidency is illegitimate, right? And so if you remove one illegitimacy with another one, well, all the better, some may argue. Then they say youth-led protest has been the thing that has fueled the power of social media, coup d'etat, then begin to follow. But for the Ghanaian interests, one thing that we wanted to look at was this import-export scenario. That if you look at the lines here that tells a story, exports is this, exporting quite a bit, and then we're importing there, right? So if there's something happens there, it may have a blowback economically because we export quite a bit there, but then there'll also be the potential of a crisis in terms of the inflow of refugees that will come into Ghana because of that intimate cultural relationship that we have there. So we obviously, we are big brothers, if you like, with Nigeria and the SAP region. You're wondering what should our response be to what is happening in Togo? Should our president be more frontal with this particular matter and show a hand of leadership and call out for Gnassingbé as direct as it should be, or we should just mind our business as we've always done as far as our foreign policy objectives and policies concerned? And that is a very fascinating place where we are right now. But again, if we don't do anything and this degenerates into another coup d'etat, very, very close to us like Burkina Faso is, then we're almost going to be sandwiched, right, by that. And so we have a stake in this. And so what should Ghana do? Then there's also the top imports that we see there from Togo, that we see refined petroleum, gas, palm and vegetable oil, reserved meat and rice, all coming in and from Togo. So we need to have a big conversation about this. And we need to spend some time. So, well, this doesn't affect me. It does. It does, for the reasons I've explained, because ECOWAS itself, the ECOWAS project has disintegrated. And this risk, again, ECOWAS is struggling for relevance. And this is just one more blow to it. And we understand from the ECOWAS community that they are meeting tomorrow to consider their response and what to do, etc. And they know everybody's watching what ECOWAS does. Everybody's watching what AU does in this matter. And what is Ghana's own role in this? What should our role be? My guest will join me for a conversation after this. Stay with me. So Togo is on fire, and we have to look at it because it is our SAP region. And when SAP region is on fire, one country is on fire, it sort of speaks to everybody else. And you know how the Africa and West Africa is looked at as one bloc, as one country even. And so this is why this conversation is important. I want to bring in my panelists who are joining me for a conversation tonight. I'm delighted that we can speak tonight to Emmanuel Bombande. And Emmanuel Bombande, as you know, is a former head of the West African Network for Peace Building, and as currently is a dialogue and mediation practitioner and former Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs and Regional Integration. And Chukwu Emeka Eze also joins me tonight. And he is the Director of Democracy Futures in Africa, the Open Society Foundations. I'm delighted to have him join us with his continental purview as far as the continent is concerned on some of these very important matters. And I will take you to Togo pretty shortly because I'm delighted that we can go to Togo live tonight and get an update. I'll bring in my guest who's joining me pretty shortly. But we'll also be speaking to Dr. Ishmael Norman, who has also been watching this very closely unfold. He's the president of the Institute for Security, Disaster and Emergency Studies, also joins us tonight. And Vladimir Ntodanso also joins us. And I'm delighted that he joins me in particular because I want to get his thoughts on the international relations dimensions to this particular question with, as you know, the French question. And then we also have the Russian play here. And then we have countries like Ghana where we say we are not aligned. But this is something that we're watching very closely and what our response as a country should be as part of ECOWAS or walking alone in calling out for Nyasingbe. So, Vladimir, I'm grateful that you could join me. But let me take you first to Togo and bring in freelance journalist Kokuvi Raoul, who joins us right now. Kokuvi, I'm grateful that you could join us and spend some time to talk to us, and we can show his picture, etc. Because obviously, for security reasons, we cannot disclose where exactly in Togo he is. But I'm delighted that he can join us tonight. What's the latest on the unrest in Togo tonight? Has calm completely returned? Are the streets now quiet?
Hello.
Hi, good. Can you hear me?
Yes, I'm hearing you, Mr. Demo.
Good. Are the streets quiet now? Are the protests over and Togo back to normal?
Yes, actually in Togo, everything is normal and the street is very quiet because today they have started the campaign. That campaign, which is leading to the municipal election for this year. And since the 28th June, all the protests just go back to the home, and at every point, strategical point, every roundabout, the police and the military are keeping them in order to prevent other disasters which is going to come from the to those who are protesting against the regime of Front Nyasingbe.
And so the streets are quiet tonight. Give me a sense. You live there. Why did this turn this violent? What really caused this? What triggered this?
Okay, I can even say that for a long time, people have started complaining about the system of the governance in Togo. And the government is also trying to show that he's ruling the population very well. But some few months ago, Togo have just changed its constitution to go to this one, the Fifth Republic, which that republic is talking about a parliamentary regime, and that regime will make Faure Nyasingbe as a president of the council, not a president of a republic. And after that, some people are protesting against that new constitution because for them, they were saying that they were not consulted. So if you have to change the constitution, you have to call from a vote, a referendum. But for them, they didn't do that thing. And the parliament who was making that changing of system also are not allowed to do it. They are not allowed to do it. According to what those people are saying, like Civil League, Togolese who are living abroad. But for the government, they think that they can do it because even if your mandate is finished, you can even be at the post and continue working. So they can do it. And after that, they were plenty shouting upon the government that they are not good, they are not governing well, and that new constitution we give to our president or Faure Nyasingbe is that constitution is going to give him power for a life, eternal power. So they were not agree, and some artists were also arrested, and some journalists were also arrested. That is why they were protesting against the governance.
It's fascinating indeed. And then thankfully, please stay with me, Kokuvi. I want to bring in Chukwuemeka now and Emmanuel Bombande, Dr. Emmanuel Bombande. Chukwuemeka, so what's your reading of what is happening there? I mean, and Kokuvi has given us a sense of this. He lives there. He's seen it all. But from the outside looking in, how are you making sense of the Togo situation?
Thank you for having me, Evans. First of all, I didn't know I was going to be on the same platform with my boss, so I'm wondering what I'm going to say that makes sense here. But suffice it to say that Africa is witnessing the emergence of a new political dispensation. This is championed by a new generation of leadership. New political cultures are emerging and new forms of people power. The leaders who cannot read in between the lines, in my opinion, will be on the wrong side of history.
Mm.
They are rendering creative, discreet, and nuanced support to these people, power spaces, places, and processes. And I think, in my opinion, if you reflect on some of the analysis that we have made in the past, even while I was still heading WANEP, post Emmanuel Bombande's era, we had alluded to that. When Mali happened, we were very clear that there are remaining countries that will still go in the same direction. And we have been vindicated. The point is, in the last decade, new intersectional and intergenerational and detribalized coalitions and pressure groups have emerged across the continent. It's not just about Togo. The movements in Senegal, Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, South Africa, Sudan, and the Sahel, such as Occupy Parliament, Recall Your MP, Text Your MP, End SARS, Free Senegal, they are not focusing on political ideologies. And that's what people don't understand. They are not ethnically organizing. They are organizing around socio-economic justice rather than even stolen elections or human rights violations. And they are asking a simple question. And don't forget, the demographic that is organizing. These are people who have been promised over time that the future belongs to you. They now want to interrogate that future. It's no longer the reimagination of democracy, in my opinion, in Africa, can no longer belong to the political elites. The youths are asking critical questions. The women are asking critical questions, whether it from, and coincidentally, it is not just happening at the urban centers. It is happening at the rural centers. It's happening at the peri-urban centers. And they are questioning what democracy is delivering for them. So the states can no longer decide what democracy should deliver to the people. The people are saying, this is what we want democracy to deliver. And to that extent, term limit has always been a very controversial and a trigger to most of the political instabilities we have had, at least in West Africa.
Yeah.
And that's why history does not lie.
Yeah, I mean, and you make a very important point. And Dr. Bomande, I need to ask you, one thing that does not add up for me, I mean, listening to my colleague in Togo, Gokuvi, this, he says, traces back to the constitutional amendment. And Chukwuemeka talks about term limits. But the constitutional amendment that gave Fonya Singbe this life presidency, if you like, happened in March. It's taking more than a year for us to see a protest. I mean, is there something else happening here? Because you would think that at the time when the change happened is when people would naturally, spontaneously then react to it and demand a stop to it. But it's taking a year plus. We're now seeing a popular uprising. Are we missing something?
Thank you so much, Evans. I'm so delighted I can be with Dr. Eze because in our conversation, he and I, we did great things in our various periods of leadership in WANEP. And a lot of it speaks to the question you are asking, also building on the summary that you made. Are we missing something? What I would want to do is to walk back to 2015. When President Mahama was president in his first term. And if you recall, the elections of 2015 were very violent in Togo. The one before that in 2010 was equally violent. But I'm bringing the 2015 into focus because that was when, as chair of ECOWAS, President Mohammed mediated a transitional, if you call it, acceptance of what has happened with the promise that there will be dialogue and there will be political reforms. So my first point is, if you want to know what is missing, it is rather a tragedy that the political elite think that the people forget the commitments they make for what we might call an appeasement that begins to look normal. And so your colleague in Togo talked about the fact that today the streets are quiet. What is missing to start with is the deception of what you see on the surface to be calm, and yet beneath it is the boiling anxiety, frustration, and tensions described by my good friend and colleague, Dr. Eze. Precisely because if we thought that for 1 year, Togo was calm, Togo was never calm. It was the latent volcano that was building up and ready now to explode. The question was, when is the explosion going to happen? And so the landmark is, rather than the reforms that respond to the grievances that led in the first place to the 2015 post-electoral violence, without consultation, the reforms rather doubled down on what many people resent as the perpetuation of elongation of power and authority. And it is now only the optics that change, but the optics do not mislead the people. And when I talk about the optics, what do I mean? Your colleague described it. Trying to move away from the executive system of government into a parliamentary system in which the president will no longer be directly elected by the people, but he'll be elected by the Constitution, by the Council of Ministers, who would invariably be predominant in the parliament and would always put the president, who now will transit to, we don't know exactly how to call it, prime minister or what name, perpetually. And so the 1 year period that you say was calm was waiting for the moment. And the moment is the constitution beginning to take hold with the next municipal election. And so the people of Togo are waking up to the reality that if we thought this was a facade, it is settling in and it is really going to happen. And that is what has agitated the violence that we are seeing at the moment. Yes.
So that for me is interesting. But you made a point I need to expand on, which is, so they're moving to this parliamentary system. But what really is wrong with that? I mean, some say, well, but isn't that what you have in Europe? A lot of European countries have that system as well, UK in particular. Well, what's the difference here?
The difference is the creation of uncertainty that appears intentional and deliberate for the perpetuation of someone in power. So if you look at the UK, there is no ambiguity about the people's expectation about their political system. So, and we don't need to go into that detail, but you have studied there and you know what I'm referring to. But the issue at hand is, and to make a quick summary again, when President Yasimbe died, and you gave us the summary in your brilliant introduction, and he immediately took the seat of power, there was a violent eruption. And I remember in 2005, Obasanjo was president. They led the efforts to calm Togo. The agreement was, present yourself to the people. If they elect you to be president, we cannot disagree with the choice of the people. So already he came into power on the premise that it is the choice of the people who are sovereign, who will determine whether or not you are president. And so for 5 years, up to 2010, he was president. Then he got elected. But the uncertainty started to build up the tensions, and that's why 2010 already there was electoral violence. Then it became worse in 2015. Now, what point am I making here? Now, after a fourth term up to 2025, by changing the system, it no longer appears as the way you have described it, that in other jurisdictions, it is not necessarily wrong. By changing it from an executive system without the consultation, and I want to refer again to my dear colleague, Dr. Eze, about the era of the youth, their vision, and what they demand, without them being part of, without them endorsing and approving a system that has been put on them that appears clearly to them that it is only now a mechanism, an instrument for the perpetuation of political power and not to respond to their aspirations, simply means whatever they do, they are ignored. And so they are now saying, you cannot ignore us. You will hear us loudly. And they are manifesting that on the streets.
Yeah, and there's a security angle to this that also is fascinating. And Dr. Ishmael Norman is with me. Dr. Norman, I'm watching the footage from Togo, and I'm doing a contrast with what we saw in Burkina Faso, in Mali, and Niger, when the people protested. In this particular case, you see that Fonya Singbe is actually still very much in charge of the security forces of the country. At least what has been reported is that he's using those security forces to silence opposition, but also to control the crowd. 7 already dead, bodies found in river bodies, etc., etc. He clearly seemed to have a very strong control over the coercive forces of the state, which doesn't seem to be the same story elsewhere in the sub-region, where then the coercive forces of the states, in this case the military, then stepped in and sided on the with the people. Is there something else happening in Togo there that still gets Fonya Singbe to the other security forces to be so loyal to him, in spite of the fact that we have people protesting? Hello, Dr. Norman. Okay, we don't seem to have Dr. Norman, but let me put that question to Chukwuemeka. I find that fascinating because, again, we are drawing parallels with elsewhere what we've seen. He's clearly seemed to have control over the security forces. If he does have control over the security forces, he must be doing something, right? I mean, that's something that, because that is where obviously the rift and the fractures begin to emerge. But he's in control fully.
Evans, that would be deceptive, not to President Fonya Singbe, because like I said, if history is anything to go by, we've had leaders in the past, whether it is President Yahya Jammeh, whether it's President Gbagbo, in the beginning, they had control. They were using state resources to appease the military, and they were on their side until the pressure was on. Let me reiterate, today's movements across Africa are polycentric in nature. It transcends party affiliations, ethno-religious formations, class, and profession. In fact, they are even fueled, and I'm shocked that lessons are not learned from what is going on in Kenya, from what happened in Senegal, from what happened in Nigeria and elsewhere. They are fueled by digital connectivity, intersectionality, and grassroots mobilization. And in my opinion, even collaborative network and innovative approaches that need further harnessing. So what is going on in Togo will not be different from what has happened elsewhere in Africa. And I am saying that subduing the citizens coercively and ensuring that their voices are not heard is only a matter of time. And just like Honorable Bombande said, for how long will that take place? People have been subdued. Nobody ever agreed that in Gambia, people's voices will be heard loud and clear. Nobody believed that in other parts of the country. The only difference for now is coercion. And it gets to a point when the people can no longer take it, and they are prepared to die. And they know already that people will pay the ultimate price. So this underscores the inseparable link between political and economic governance. And Ghana, Kenya, South Africa are clear demonstration that fixing formal democracy without addressing social and economic policies that enable dignified livelihood and inclusive development is a futile exercise. And let me say this very clearly, Evans. Whether it is Libya or whether it's elsewhere in Africa, people are not just asking for good governance. They want participation. How has the people of Togo been carried along in a matter that concerns their life on a daily basis? That is the critical question to ask. You cannot manipulate the constitution and use the instrument of force to even further coerce the people. The connection between socio-economic and political issues within Africa's social movement discourse can expand the imaginaries of democracy. And those who think that tyranny and autocracy and use of coercion will silence the people are on the wrong side of history. And that's my opinion.
And to that, I want to go to Kokuvi, because I want to get a sense, Kokuvi, if you're still with me. Kokuvi, can you hear me? Hello, Kokuvi?
Hello.
Yes, Kokuvi, give me a sense of this. When I watch what is happening on television, I get the sense that Faure Gnassingbé has complete control over the military, because he's using them on the streets against the people. I see them. And then the police.
Yes.
In Togo, do you agree that he has full control, and are the police and military all very loyal to him, or there have been some cracks and disagreements emerging?
Okay. Hello?
Yes.
What can I say that? What can I say that is what? Listen, Faure Gnassingbé is the supreme person of the armed forces.
Yes.
He is the one who can nominate or appointed. Who is the one who have the ability to appoint the supreme chief of the army, the armed force supreme chief. He is the one, because according to the constitution, he is the leader of the army. And now we do not have a ministry of armed forces.
Okay.
So that ministry does not exist. He is the one controlling the army. That is the first of which I can say. The second thing is that now Togo for a very long time, military forces are the one who are still governing. If you are looking at our DC, what we call prefet, you are looking at some institution. All of them are ruling by the militaries. So, but according to the constitution, Faure Gnassingbé have his son, or Faure Gnassingbé is the one controlling the armed forces, because the constitution made him as the supreme chief of the armed forces. Yes, that's what I can say.
And what about the police? Because I've seen also that policemen also in uniform on the ground still doing his bidding.
Yes.
They're also very loyal to him.
Yes. The police are control with. Hello, are you hearing me?
Yes, I can. Yes.
Yes, I'm saying that the police are controlled by the Ministry of Security and Civil Protection, and those persons are also appointed by Faure Gnassingbé.
Okay. So
the current Ministry of Security is Colonel Majulba, and that colonel is also appointed by Faure Gnassingbé, and the government is also controlled by Faure Gnassingbé.
Okay.
Yes.
And he makes it.
But according to the constitution, the members of the government, the ministers have to respect what the chief of the government have said. And according to the new constitution, Faure Gnassingbé is the chief of the government.
Okay. And you made a very important point about our equivalent of the Ministry of Defense doesn't exist. So everything else channels directly through the president. And it's to that now that I come to that big subject of the role that ECOWAS and sub-regional countries can play in this. And Kokuvi, do you get a sense that in Togo, they appreciate, how is the relationship with France playing a role in this uprising in Togo?
Okay, France, the relationship between France and Togo, for a long time, that relationship is like partners with other countries. Because Faure Gnassingbé, after the 2020 election, was at France with Emmanuel Macron. He was there. And you still have the embassy of France in Togo. And you also have the embassy of Togo in France. Secondly, the person I was talking about right now, that he is the Minister of the Security, was also representing Togo as a diplomatic chief in France. But since yesterday, we saw on social media that Jean-Luc Mélenchon, a French politician, who was blaming the Togo's government. But as for now, we do not have any statements from the France itself, neither from the government, neither from the president, Emmanuel Macron, or from their prime minister. Even their embassy is not talking about, is still keeping the silence about what's going on in Togo. So I'm not able now to tell you exactly about that relationship.
But is there an expectation in Togo that France must say something or France must get involved?
Okay, some activists are blaming France that they are against Faure Gnassingbé because Faure Gnassingbé is supporting the people of Sahel, like Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali. They are blaming him. And now at the north of Togo, we have terrorist jihadism attacks. And they are blaming France that France is the one who is using those people to destabilize the force regime. Because Faure now is like a Pan-Africanist, and he is trying to help Sahel people like Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso to come out from France domination. Because you yourself, you know that all over Africa, people are blaming France. People are against France. Now, when Faure Gnassingbé is helping those people from Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali, some people are saying that if you have those protests in Togo now, it's France who is trying to help them. Last time, one of our colleagues, Florent Moinou, was arrested during those demonstrations, and she was asked to delete all the videos she took during this demonstration. That is the first one. Secondly, RFI, Radio France International, and France 24 are all suspended by the authority which is regulating media's case in Togo for 3 months, and they were blaming them that they are not treating about the demonstration well. They are just taking part. They were the one who are behind those people who are protesting against the regime. So that's what I can say about the ring.
It's a very interesting perspective Kokuvi just brings in, and I want to put that to Dr. Emmanuel Bombande. He says in Togo, Mr. Bombande, he says in Togo that there is a sense that France somehow must get involved. I accept that the government there believes that France may be behind the unrest. And there's also the view, he says, that from France's view, that Faure Gnassingbé may actually be helping the Sahelian countries who are breaking away. And in the northern part of Togo, they also now have insurgents there. I mean, what do you make of this, Mr. Bombande? I think it's a fascinating. I haven't had that perspective brought to bear, but listening to a Togolese in Togo, colleague, journalist, freelance who lives there, say it seems like there's far more at play here than just unrest.
Evans, thank you so much. First of all, underhand dealings that are secret, we can never run away that they don't happen. But let me put this into perspective. France has been bruised a lot to the extent that from the experiences of the recent past, France is very careful not to be seen to be involved in the internal or domestic matters of one of its former colonies. Today in Seville, in Spain, on the sidelines of the conference on development, the president of Senegal, Diomaye Faye, met with Francois Macron on the sideline. And it's because Macron is desperately seeking for a resetting, for making amends, and trying to go back to the level of friendship. So on that background, it will be very difficult to see France trying to meddle in Togo without clarity on what the outcomes might mean and how it could further isolate them as another African country gone completely out of the way. That is one. But the second thing is, if you look at the current geopolitical landscape and a lot of what is going on, opportunism is often played for the purposes of political survival or political, if you call it, holding on to power, as we've been talking about. What do I mean by this? The supposed alliance between Togo and the alliance of Sahel states, it's not for anything convenient to Togo as a country, but it is one of the strategies of political survival. But maybe survival here is weak, but what I would call, it is one of the mechanisms to continue to hold on to power. And you can see it in the context of the one that you call the cerveau, the brain of the current president is Robert Doucet, who is the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Togo. Very quick background. He was foreign minister already in 2013. When Ghana hosted the Council of Ministers meeting in 2015, he was already foreign minister for 2 years. I was in that meeting. He was the one fighting every foreign minister in that room about how Togo should be left alone to decide its future. If you recall, Evans, and we at that time in 1M had convened meetings to argue that it was time to upgrade and amend our supplementary protocol on democracy and good governance. And we were now advocating through the regional leaders of West Africa, through ECOWAS, for this upgrading to happen. And our advocacy at that time as civil society informed a lot of Ghana's leadership when they became chair of ECOWAS. My former boss, Hannah Tete, was chairing that Council of Ministers. Now, look at where we are today, 2025. So he's been foreign minister for how many years? Yeah. If you want to compare it, just look at me. I left one end of 2014, handed over to my good friend here, January 2015, right? Then I went to work with the UN office in Senegal. Then I came to serve in the government of Ghana. Then we handed over in 2017. Then I went to the UN again and worked for 8 years. And now practicing on my own. So I have shifted how many different career jobs. He is still the foreign minister. But he also presents himself as your number one Pan-Africanist. So in international fora, he argues as the Pan-Africanist. So his argument as the Pan-Africanist is what makes the government of Togo to be seen as somebody supporting the alliance of Sahel states. But it's a reactive, if you call it, approach as to how we can preserve and maintain power within the illusion of Pan-Africanism, and nobody should touch us. And that is why we must look at it in terms of the opportunism at play and in terms of the real intention for meaningful transformation and progress. And what is now happening is the youth are no longer thinking in those silos. And as it was brilliantly articulated by Dr. Eze, there is something else that is their motivation. And these old political elites must understand that the times have changed and they can no longer buy that. But for the Franco-Africa relationship, if I were to end on that note, it will be very interesting to see going forward how this continues to look like.
Yeah.
Relate to your question to your colleague in Togo.
Yeah.
This loyalty of military to the regime in office always appears temporal.
Okay.
It can break within 24 hours. Let me quickly do this. The current Prime Minister of Senegal, Ousmane Sonko, sitting at the back of his car, they took the butts of the gun, crashed the windscreens, extracted him, jailed him. On bail, they will surround his office, his house. They will block the street and prevent him from sending his children to school. He and the current president, they were in jail because the people were demanding and insisting on the political change they want. It couldn't stop it. And today, Sonko is prime minister and Domayefaye is president. So let's not look at the current military and police roles in Togo to in itself be sacrosanct. It is, in my view, the vertebrae or the spine is weak because it is not sitting on a credible political system and it can break at any moment depending on where it sways to.
I mean, Chukwemeka, so what should ECOWAS reaction be then? Looking at the geopolitical context that Dr. Bombandi just illustrated, in the last 24 hours, ECOWAS issued a statement. I mean, after more than 20 days of protest, and it was a very interesting, meek, silent, whimpery kind of statement. They say, for example, that they've taken notice of the recent chaos there in certain towns in Togo, particularly it says in Lomé, and that regrettable human consequences. But this is the part. It says, in the interest of social cohesion, the ECOWAS Commission calls for restraint and urges all stakeholders to favor dialogue with a view to creating a peaceful socio-economic and political climate conducive to development. He ends by saying, this is just a 3-paragraph statement, the ECOWAS Commission expresses a sympathy and remains available to contribute to efforts to preserve social peace in Togolese Republic. Give me your reaction to this statement.
Evans, I sympathize with ECOWAS because each time we talk about ECOWAS, we look in the direction of the Commission. The Commission is only an agent or a vehicle through which the authority of heads of states and government convey their political will. So to that extent, I sympathize with ECOWAS. The truth of the matter is that multilateralism at the moment is challenged. Whether it is ECOWAS, whether it's African Union, whether it is the UN, it's challenged. The morality of these institutions to continue to whip bad behaviors to line is challenged. Now, this is ECOWAS being guided by its normative frameworks, articulated at a certain time. Would these normative frameworks, are they still fit for purpose? My answer is no. Did ECOWAS as a commission not envisage that alongside civil society actors? Yes, they did. And they called for that which can give them a bite to whip this kind of bad behaviors to line. Because of the ECOWAS voting system, not as a democratic institution, but as a consensus-oriented institution, which means 15 must agree over 15. That did not happen in 2015. And Honorable Emmanuel Bombande alluded to that. So ECOWAS envisaged that a day like this will happen. So ECOWAS is helpless. That's the problem. The only thing they can do is issue this kind of statement of we call for peace, we call for dialogue. That's no longer enough.
I mean, but can they be more proactive?
No, you have to be proactive on the basis of what you can use to whip bad behaviors to line. Remember that there is always tension between those who are asking for change and the beneficiaries of the status quo. ECOWAS can be as proactive as it can, but only using preventive diplomacy. The question then is the tension between supranationality and subsidiarity. So how do you balance that? When it favors member states, they call for ECOWAS to come to their rescue. When they want to do something untoward, they say this is of sovereignty. So ECOWAS foresaw this long time ago. Civil society foresaw it, called for the review of the protocol on democracy and good governance, knowing that there are defects and there are gaps, so that they can have an instrument with which they can do that which they did many years ago. Some member states, particularly then Gambia and Togo, reneged.
Yeah.
And that's the story we have today. And to that extent, Burkina happened, Mali happened, Niger happened, Guinea happened, Togo happened, and I can assure you, Evans, take it to the bank. Another one will happen before the end of the year.
Mm-hmm. But why does it appear that so far it's only the French-speaking countries that seem to be in this particular quagmire? Is there anything there?
No. Researchers have proven too many things. Number one, there's a nexus between lack of clarity on term and this kind of situation. Proven. The second one is history of coup d'etat and what we are seeing today. Once you have had coup d'etat over a period of time, you're likely to have again. The third one is that also the spaces for dialogue is closed. And the third one is what both your colleague in Togo and Honorable Bombade alluded to, which is manipulation and the geopolitical dimensions. Today, France is careful because it is not just a relationship that is based on past colonies, but it's also transactional. Let's not run away from that. It's also transactional. How many other countries would they lose? And how will that affect their stability and their economy? Let's also discuss that. And that's why we are saying that African leaders should see beyond their regime. They should see beyond sitting tight in power to what that matters to African citizens.
I mean, Mr. Bombande, back to the ECOWAS question, right? Yeah. I mean, we all see this unfolding in slow motion. From last year when the constitution was changed, now it has erupted. And you have called out, obviously, Fonya Singbe for imposing on himself this, lifetime presidency. So why does ECOWAS feel incapable of simply calling out Fonya Singbe for changing, manipulating it has been called a constitutional coup, and installing himself a lifetime president? Isn't that very easy to do?
No, thank you so much. Let me add on to the expose of my colleague here, Dr. Eze. I could not help it, but in reflection before we came online with you, I was trying very hard to look at our protocol on democracy and good governance. I want to reinforce what Dr. Eze has said. ECOWAS can only work with the instruments they have. What is it that is available to them? And because I'm in the comfort of my study, I can easily pool my resources and do the quick research. And as you can see, I'm holding the protocol in my hand.
Yeah.
If you look at our constitutional convergence principles, which is political, you scan through it. The only thing that I have seen is under Article 1, subsection J, that says that the freedom of association and the right to meet and organize peaceful demonstrations shall also be guaranteed. If you look at everything that the government of Togo has violated at this point of our conversation, that might be the only thing they have violated. But you are the one who told us that even in the violation, that included killings, they are saying they drowned. They were not beaten by the military and the police. So, the authority of heads of state, if they call the president of Togo now, or if they go to meet him physically, on what are they holding him of a violation of the very treaty that all of them signed onto, and Togo signed on.
They can't hold him to the constitutional coup?
On that, the protocol is clear that unconstitutionalism is when it happens violently in an overthrow through a coup d'etat. What we know as media practitioners like yourself and ourselves is that the current arrangements in our protocol would be interpreted as internal matters that Togo is going through. And that's why the appeal is for them to deal with their internal matters peacefully and to empathize with them.
Fascinating. So in other words, ECOWAS can only be triggered when there's a coup d'etat.
Because it's in the protocol.
Yeah.
Because it's a strong change of government.
Exactly.
So the ECOWAS mandate only comes. Interesting. All ECOWAS mandate will only come to play when there's a coup d'etat.
Yes. Every other thing is preventive diplomacy and morality, and it's not enough.
Yeah, and that's why his earlier remarks were, this has become obsolete. This is no longer relevant to our time today. This is totally inadequate. So what should we do? Let's completely upgrade this so that we can hold ourselves accountable to good governance in service of our people. Because it is when we do that, and keep in mind we're talking about a multilateral institution, and that subject has been described. And in international relations, in multilateralism, states can only hold each other accountable on the common treaties that they sign, and not on the basis of how we are all emotional about what is happening. So if we have this upgraded, then we can hold each other to a new reference, to a new standard. But why is it difficult? There's no political will. Because we later on found out, before I left ONEP and he took over and increased the institution, and he has now gone and we have a new leadership, we found out that even the meeting you referred to, in the Council of Ministers meeting, Gambia and Togo were openly against amending or upgrading this protocol. But when it went into closed session of the heads of state, and none of us, of course, can have access to those closed sessions, Cote d'Ivoire joined them and explained in eloquence why we should not upgrade this, but we should leave it. It has served us, and we should leave it where it is. So the point I am making is, Evans, this conversation we are having also touches on leadership. If we do not have leaders who in their conscience reflect on the capacity to be of service to their people, meaning when one life is lost, they cannot go to bed and sleep, and that everything they do is to guarantee the safety, the protection, not only of the security of their territorial space, but also the safety of their people. They can never have the political will in treaties that promote good governance. And that is our tragedy. And so the young people are demanding the type of leadership that is compassionate, the type of leadership that has empathy, not only on rules and regulations, but on the welfare and the well-being of the people. And that is what we meant earlier on in the conversation by socio-economic development, and not just going to elect leaders.
I mean, just before we came on air, we were billed to get the ECOWAS Director of Governance to join us. And he said, well, there's a very important meeting that's happening on Togo at the ECOWAS level. And so he's unable to join today, but following the meeting tomorrow, he can join. So, Chukwuemeka, if that is what the protocols and the treaty says, and they can only function within the confines of that, well, what's the point of meeting then? Well, what's the point of ECOWAS?
It's moral persuasion, nothing else, honestly speaking. And this is not a conversation that we have not had several times. And that is why people are beginning to question, including the AES countries. That's why they are questioning. So why do we continue to belong to ECOWAS? Because in the first place, ECOWAS does not have what it takes to bite when bad governance is entrenched. So why is it that once you have coup d'etat, you come in? The truth of the matter is that that is only what they have on their protocols. Every other thing is preventive diplomacy. And I'm saying, to that extent, that it is no longer enough. And this bad behavior cannot be curbed by just preventive diplomacy and persuasion. Whether it is African Union, whether it is ECOWAS, the tragic story is the same. So what do we need to do? What we need to do is to continue this people power movement. We need to reform our multilateral institutions, from the UN to African Union to ECOWAS. We need to have that political will to look beyond our regime, because he who is president today will be an ordinary citizen tomorrow. So we need to have that political will to look beyond today and reform our institutions. When we reform them, then we can hold the commission. We can hold ourselves, like Bombardier said, accountable. The second thing that we must observe and pay attention to is the social movements across Africa. They have become the new voices that want to reimagine democracy and the way government should operate. Those who don't pay attention to it will be on the wrong side of history. The reimagination of democracy is centered around those voices that have been silenced over a period of time. They are the women, they are the artisans, they are the creative industry, they are the youths, they are the religious bodies. Those who have been silenced over time. Why? The question is why? They are also buying from the same markets. They feel the same pain. So governance is no longer, and I think Ghana has made that demonstration. When you don't govern well, we show you the way. Yeah. And I think that's the way policy is supposed to be.
I mean, now that you mentioned...
The difference is that it is no longer that period of the docility of the youth and the young people. They are in the arena, and they have more technical capacity than you and I. And those who don't pay attention to it, they will be on the wrong side of history.
I mean, and Mr. Bundy, since Chukwemeka mentions Ghana, yes, ECOWAS has been docile, it's been trapped in its own treaties and can't move, but can Ghana break ranks and do something different here, i.e. through our president and through diplomatic means, maybe step in and call out what is happening in Togo?
So first of all, it begins with how we continue to build the credibility within as a country. And so I cannot help but on this 1st July to re-echo the message of the president at the National Day of Prayer and Thanksgiving, that we should not take our peace for granted, and we must have honesty, we must have good leadership, selfishness in serving the people of Ghana, and everybody must be accountable. And he made the emphasis that he himself as the president is under the law. And trust me, when I was with him, when he was mediating the exit of Yahya Jammeh in Banjul, he had lost the election to President Nana Akufo-Addo, and we're now in the transition period for a handover. And when he arrived in Banjul, the message was very clear. We stood for the election. I campaigned hard. I lost the election. The good example to tell you, Yahya Jammeh, there's nothing wrong with losing an election. Live like the way I am preparing to live. And the important thing is respect the choice of the people. I give this background to say that with this, as you said, what can Ghana do? I think it goes back to the phrase of my good friend. He can take the phone, but it's purely on moral persuasion.
Yeah, but he has a lot of credit in the bank, right? He has a lot of credit in the bank. Ghana itself has a lot of credit in the bank that he can leverage.
Yes, he can. The way he can leverage that is to encourage what I would call increase, might be a softer word, the escalation of a political will across the sub-region to urgently bring about the type of political reforms for accountability of leadership. But this cannot be done like in 2 days, 3 days, or a week. In the response to the crisis, it is more and more of an appeal and getting the weight of other leaders to weigh on the current leadership of Togo, to look at their people, to look at their country, to look at the future, and reverse the trend in which they find themselves. That he can do, but that is the type of preventive diplomacy that you cannot hear about. I don't know whether that is possible or feasible at this time. That is doable. But as Emeka said, we need accountability that is robust. That one we can depend on. And to that extent, we see it happening. But now you ask me to talk about Ghana. My good friend from Nigeria, look at what is also happening in Nigeria. They still have a long way to elections in 2027. Look at what is happening in the ruling party. Look at what is happening in the opposition party. I bring that to Ghana and to say, you in the media, those in civil society, those of us who have served in government, everybody should be interested also in what is happening in our political parties when we talk about accountability and when we talk about strengthening democracies. Because if what is happening in the parties go wrong, people feel they cannot be held accountable. People feel they are godfathers and godmothers in a party and nobody can touch them. It would have a resonance on the overall political landscape of the country. So we need to look at it holistically and comprehensively so that Nigeria can come out of where they find themselves. Ghana can continue to increase its leverage, deepen its democracy, and then we see that happening across the region. And I have this very profound observation to conclude this. I have always thought, contrary to the arguments of many people, that because Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso left ECOWAS, ECOWAS is going to begin to crumble. I always say that that is not the reason why ECOWAS is going to collapse. ECOWAS collapse is going to happen with the 12 remaining states refusing to respect the principles and the values of good governance and participation and genuine involvement of young people, of women. Then one by one, we'll see the implosion happening as they are happening. And once that takes on to a different level, let's kiss ECOWAS goodbye and fold our hands. That is then when ECOWAS will collapse. So there is an urgent call for the leadership of ECOWAS today to be introspective and promoting the internal reforms. Because our other neighbor, we would have mentioning those names, we know everything is not good there. Yeah. Every day there is dissatisfaction. Yeah. So I understood my friend when he said before the end of the year there will be another one. This is the time for us to turn around, reverse, and take on the political will to hold our region together. And why is it important? The terrorism is not going to stop. The more the countries are weak, the more terrorists gain the space. Yesterday and today, there have been battles in Mali with the army fighting. It's a full-scale war. And the terrorist groups resisting and fighting back. The Lake Chad Basin, Boko Haram has never been liquidated. So these are very serious matters. Yeah. And governance is about leadership. It's not just about how we go through the emotions and then feel that we are good. I mean, I think very important.
And Chukwuemeka, so there's Ghana, but then there's big brother Nigeria. Of course, you are in Nigeria, so give me a sense there. So if ECOWAS can do it, can't Nigeria do it? Can Nigeria step in as a big brother and try and call things to order?
I would say in the past, yes. I don't know about today, and I have to be very honest about it. I've always believed that when Nigeria assumes its position, the sub-region will be better for it. I don't see that kind of internal leadership which would transcend to... It's 2 years to the elections in Nigeria, and what we are hearing is not good governance. What we are hearing is endorsements of the current president by all manner of persons, which is a distraction in my opinion. So Nigeria needs to solve its internal problems before it can extend that to the sub-region. So you cannot continue to bear the mantra of hegemonic power when you cannot exercise that. And the only way to exercise that is, first of all, you put your house in order. And once you put your house in order, it rubs off on the sub-region. If history is anything to go by, I can assure you that in the times of Obasanjo, this would not happen. And I can say that emphatically. He didn't need any of this protocol. He stood for principles and he pulled every other person along, But today, The problem, the tragedy of leadership in the Salt region is that we keep getting it lower and lower. Once you go to any country and you think, including sometimes in our institutions, once you go to any country or any institution and you feel that this is a foregone era, we are entering a new era, you get a more diluted leadership, you know. So leadership for me is not something that you come to thinking about what to do. It is something you're prepared for. I am sorry to say that I don't see that happening more and more, unfortunately, including in our intergovernmental organizations.
I mean, and just finally, before we wrap up, so what really is the solution to this malaise? We saw Mali, we saw Burkina Faso, we saw Niger. We're seeing Togo now. It hasn't degenerated into a military coup yet, but if I listen to you, Chukwu, you are predicting that we'll see more unrest in the sub-region before the end of the year. What is the solution? How do we avert that? How do we stop this degeneration and the rollback of democracy?
I can't remember the exact date, Evans, but beyond what the civil society and the ECOWAS Commission were clamoring for the first time, the authority of heads of state and government said, take back this protocol, refine it, and make it fit for purpose. We were all excited. Again, civil society, supported by ECOWAS Commission, we reviewed the protocol, made a presentation. At that meeting of heads of state and government, one president said, remove it from the agenda. Stop circulating it, it never exists. My opinion is we either reform to hold each other accountable or we go back to our respective countries and begin to romance our sovereignty. With implication, not just on the sub-region, but also in the collective voice that ECOWAS has been known for. I can assure you, Evans, most of the protocols and normative frameworks that exist today in African Union, they were simply copied, pasted from the ECOWAS protocol and normative framework. I can't imagine that ECOWAS of today has become a shadow of itself just because of people's personal interests in the region. Anywhere else that there is ambiguity of term limit, whether it's in Central Africa or elsewhere, this is what they are facing. I am shocked that ECOWAS, that is the most progressive regional economic community, have found itself in this situation. So the only solution is let us come together, mobilize people's power. For a people-centric politics and policies, let's mobilize our citizens to put pressure on our leaders to reform ECOWAS and also upgrade our protocol on democracy and good governance, which has become obsolete.
Yeah, Mr. Bobande, what do we do to pull from the brink, the sub-region?
First of all, if I were in the corridors of government, I would advise the new chair of ECOWAS, the president of Sierra Leone, President Madabiu, he needs to call a special summit to take into account the context of our conversation. And because of time, I don't need to repeat it. In how we come together, as my colleague has said, to reset the entire sub-region with the needed political will for reform. But I did this deliberately to emphasize one point. What I'm trying to suggest is we need to change our mindset to how dialogue would open up the spaces for us to respond to our challenges. Right now, and Evans, if you go back to when ECOWAS was trying to respond to the third coup d'etat which happened in Niger. No, I think Niger and Burkina Faso, okay, they came at that point.
Yeah.
When that meeting took place in Accra, the mindset was military. When the former chair of ECOWAS was sworn in Guinea-Bissau, his first comments, it was all military. We will deal with anybody who attempts a coup d'etat. We will not allow adventurers to come near the seat of power. We need to shift our mindset to the type of dialogue that strengthens West Africa, not because of its military capacities, because we don't have that in abundance, but because of its political principles and values. That for me is critical. So that will be one. So at the end of the last ECOWAS summit, was it a week ago in Abuja, there was an appeal to activate the standby force. If the idea is to be in solidarity with countries in need like the Sahel states to fight off terrorism, all of us can agree. But if the idea is a standby force to protect regimes so that they cannot fall down because they could be overthrown, it is completely misplaced. We need to also, at the third level, change that orientation. And here, I'm technically supposed to be a diplomat, considering my former role. But let me remove my hat here. The reason why ECOWAS has gone completely down. So take it from His Excellency Mohammed Ibn Chambers, his leadership. And that is the peak to which my colleague Dr. Eze talked about how ECOWAS was revered across not only Africa but the world. Then we had a succession. But after the one who came after His Excellency Ibn Chambers, things started to slide downwards. What was the reason? Because officials were now beholden to their authorities who nominated them to become ECOWAS commissioners and ECOWAS presidents and vice presidents, rather than promoting the collective interests of the region through the commission. And that has continued to the point that as we speak, the current vice chair of ECOWAS is from Togo. And what she hates is for anybody to make commentary that goes against the president who put her there. That is the truth. To the extent that there is a legislator called Marius Sanya, who is also an ECOWAS legislator. And there were battles fought during ECOWAS parliamentary sessions because the the chair happens to come from Togo in terms of the parliament, and the commission's vice chair is also from Togo. So they have hijacked the institution, forgive my undiplomatic description here, to satisfy the interests of those who put them into those offices. But that is so short-termist. It is very limited in thinking. It is, in my view, selfish. It does not take into account the collective interests of about 350 million West Africans. And all that mindset has to change. All that way of working has to change in order for us to pull out of the current situation and look now to an ECOWAS in which truly we all serve in different roles and capacities, but it is the principles and the accountabilities that hold us, and not how we are beholden to individuals in terms of political patronage and in terms of the personal interests and the perks that come to us. I mean, and to that extent, Cardinal Texan's reflection was that all the wealth and anything that is good should be for us to collectively support and serve one another, and not for individual interests to take it and to now create huge problems for all of us in the future.
I mean, thank you very much, Mr. Bombande, and thank you, Dr. Chukwuemeka. Fascinating indeed, and both gentlemen have traced their roots back to WANEP, but Chukwuemeka now with the Open Society Foundations, and you know Bombande is a dialogue and mediation practitioner and former Deputy Foreign Affairs Minister. I'm grateful that you both joined us. I'm grateful to Kokuvi, who joined us also earlier, and the report suggests that there are further protests planned. And Kokuvi told us that because there are municipal elections that are beginning now, and people want to take advantage of that to hit the streets and for more protests. We keep an eye on that here on JoyNews, your truly West African continental media house, looking at what is happening on the continent and beyond. Enjoy the rest of the evening.